Why do we need freedom? Why do we need freedom of speech? How is freedom of speech different from hate speech? And why should we defend the right of someone, some individuals, to say things that we consider to be hate speech? After all, it's hate speech. Who would want to tolerate fascist slogans from white supremacists or Russian demands from blacks? Is Antifa a terrorist organization along with Mexican drug cartels and Al-Qaeda, which has turned into Hamas or Hezbollah? Who has the right to label people and then unleash the full force of the state, the military, and law enforcement on those they've marked? This needs to be understood because completely opposite opinions are coming from all directions. The former only honest man, honest and decent Democratic senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, has left the Senate and left the party. Many people actually considered him as a presidential candidate. But he said, I wanted the Republicans to win in 2024. Why? Shall we listen to him? Who, in fact, stopped several disgusting initiatives of the Komsomol Fascist Party of Democrats. He's another senator, a senator from Arizona, also a Democrat, Christy Sinema, Cry Christo or Christy Sinema. They left the Democratic Party and became independents.
Welcome back. Former West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin recalls his days during the Biden presidency, where he says the Democrats were striving for raw political power.
The former Democrat turned independent said this based on what I knew and witnessed firsthand.
I wanted the Republicans to win the majority in the Senate in 2024. I believe that was the only hope for preserving the Senate as an institution.
I truly believe that if the Republicans were in power, they would support the filibuster, the last barrier preventing complete one-party rule.
Now joining me is former West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin.
Joe, great to see you. Thanks for coming this morning. Glad to be with you, Maria.
Well, that must have been quite a relief. Tell us about how you've been feeling over the past few years.
Yes, I've been observing closely. And when Chuck Schumer basically said he wanted to get rid of the filibuster, it was me and Kirsten Sinema, who refused to do it. Get rid of it in 2021. Hey, then everything shifted. They had to collaborate with the other side. The Senate lets the minority influence decisions, while the House of Representatives relies on a simple majority of 218 to decide things. Do whatever you want if you have control, Democrat or Republican. That's always been how the Senate works. Build the situation, cool it down. I would warn my Republican friends. Right now, they all promised me before I left that they would never get rid of the filibuster, but now they're trying to undermine it around the edges. We need to be very careful because everything comes full circle. I hope that we can keep the Senate mostly in a bipartisan manner, that we should work together. This fierce attack must be calmed down. It cannot continue. Maria, and there is only one person who I think can set the tone for us right now, and that's our president, President Donald Trump. And I ask President Trump, we need you to be the comforter of the nation. We need the commander-in-chief to be a comforter now, to calm the situation and keep the country united and not let it become even more divided.
Manchin and Sinema did not let the Democrats usurp full power in the Senate. Joe went around to his Republican colleagues before the vote and got their promise that the Republican Party would not change the Senate rules in order to gain full power. Because the Senate is structured in such a way, the United States Senate is naturally built so that the majority is required to work and consult with the minority in order to pass any resolutions. And this cannot, and in my opinion, he is right, this must never be lost under any circumstances. Otherwise, we will become like the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics or East Germany or Venezuela. By the way, let's listen to Maria, who has become a serious force today in the world of American journalism.
I have to say, before I got to Fox, I worked at CNBC for 20 years and knew nothing about politics. Absolutely nothing.
I came here and somehow found this story about collusion with Russia. And I just did what I know how to do, which is try to follow the truth. And when I realized that the Russian collusion was just a fabricated story and another political trick that one political party used against another to destroy its enemy, I thought, oh my God, I have to tell everyone. I can't believe it. This is madness, these political dirty tricks.
And when I did that, I just got crushed. I mean, they all came together against me.
How dare I say that the collusion with Russia was not true? How did we get here?
Welcome to my world. Let's see how we got here. In 1949, they adopted the doctrine of fairness, which said that both sides should be represented. The airwaves were supposed to report both sides, for and against. This continued until 1987. It was repealed in 1987 because Congress at that time, I think it was Congressman Dick Cheney, led to its repeal. Then it became possible to report just one side of the news, whether from the Republican or Democratic perspective. We need to look at how we basically provide information to the public and think about that. The president himself said, I think 2 days ago, that when considering this person accused of murder, my thoughts and prayers are with Charlie Kirk and his family. I can't imagine how these two little beautiful children will grow up without their wonderful father, and the widow is left without her husband. It's terrible, and we all should mourn. This happens too often. This will stop, but you can't stop it unless you basically stop spreading information and essentially stop losing and using platforms. They use social platforms to spread this information. You know, freedom of speech has its limits, Maria. Why can't we set limits? Take this section 230 and update it around freedom of speech so that these platforms are held accountable.
It's ridiculous. The question is, has there always been such bitterness, such radicalism, such division? At the very least, with pleasure. If not always, then how did it start? And who started it? Who made it personal and sharply radical?
You said, this goes back to 1949. I don't think disagreements in Congress and in politics in general go back to 1949. I think it's a much more recent phenomenon.
No, that's where it all started.
With the principle.
By the way, I don't think he's completely centrist. Socially, he's a liberal, of course, but when it comes to business, management, and power, he's a conservative. But he wants to create a new party and positions himself in the middle so that those who are dissatisfied with both sides can join. I think that just like me, he believes that the end of the Democratic Party as we know it may come soon. He will try to rebuild it, to create it based on centrist, not leftist, but centrist values.
To me, I had to have security next to me sometimes. At one point, as the situation escalated, the death threats became unbelievable for both me and my family. And I kept thinking, this is not who we are as Americans. I just couldn't agree with some of the bills. They were just enormous. And I told President Biden, one day I was talking to him, I said, Mr. President, I can't support it. I said, I'm like John Kennedy. Don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
As you understand, he was targeted by the wrongdoers, those for whom he was an obstacle to turning the United States of America into a socialist paradise like Cuba and Venezuela. And he, as I already mentioned, and Christie Sinema got in the way. And gentlemen, our hero, to be continued. Now, there's another person in the Senate, that's Federman, also a Democrat, but exactly that. A Democrat, but a decent person.
By passing this law, you change the psychology of nations to, what else can my country do for me? I wasn't raised that way. That's not what I believe. We have to contribute. This is an experiment. We govern ourselves, and by governing ourselves, you have to contribute to society. Whether you're running for office, supporting someone, or investing your time, you can't just stand aside. Eventually, I decided enough was enough.
Listen, Joe, you said you can't support Build Back Better, but is that really true? Did Joe Biden really come up with Build Back Better?
I feel like the Democratic Party has been taken over.
I don't think so. And I told him that's not the case. I said it's the far left. I've often told the president, yes, Mr. President, your staff is pulling you so far left, you don't even recognize yourself. I've known him a long time. He's a good man, and I've worked with him. And you could always make a deal with then Senator Joe Biden, and when he was vice president, you could make deals with him. But in this position, his staff took him so far to the left, it was unrecognizable, and I told him, and I just told myself, yes, I like both sides. Republicans who are my dear friends, they have great ideas. I want to work with them. I have room for Democrats, too.
Is it fair to say that some of the far left really took advantage of his weakened position? I mean, yes, you're right. When you worked with him in the Senate, he was strong. But over the past couple of years, it's been clear what happened. I mean, former White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre testified before the House Oversight Committee last week. She was questioned about hiding the former president's mental abilities, and Karine Jean-Pierre told investigators she hadn't noticed any change in his competence. Yeah, right. But she admitted that he, quote, is no longer the speaker he was when she first met him. Former Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg admitted that the former president should not have run for re-election in 2024. It would have been better for Democrats if the decision came earlier. Joe, what are your thoughts? What about this cover-up, his deteriorating condition over the past few years?
Well, the only thing I can tell you is that, as a commander-in-chief, whether you're a governor or the president of the United States, you have to. Basically, your firm must ensure that your administration follows your wishes, and that takes a lot of energy and time. I didn't think Joe had the energy left to fight his own administration since they were so left-wing, and I would get rid of many people who didn't have a centrist mindset for our country. We touched on the topic. Joe Biden...
He didn't even know where his administration was leading the country, where it was trying to change the country, how they were trying to turn the United States of America into the United Socialist States of America.
So when you see someone celebrating Charlie's murder, condemn them to hell, call their employer. We oppose political violence and value civility, which is absent when celebrating a political assassination.
That was the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, who called for reporting those who celebrated the murder of Charlie Kirk. Honestly, that made me uncomfortable. Maybe it's because, well, let's call it, I have some not entirely positive experience with that. But Vance's words started a dialogue about freedom of speech, which is actually very important, about the freedom of expression and association. I'm talking about what the left calls hate speech, which is supposedly banned and should be prosecuted. But who decides what is hate speech and what isn't? They decide themselves. It's like, yes, we said the same thing as you, but what we said was good and positive, while what you said was hate speech.
His comments came after several companies and organizations took action against employees for their public statements about the killing of Kirk.
Microsoft and the National Broadcasting Corporation cut ties with analyst Matthew Doid last Wednesday after he suggested on air that Kirk's rhetoric led to his death. Comcast executives stated that Dodd made an unacceptable and insensitive comment about the tragic event.
Question: can an employee be fired if they express their opinion?
On Friday, the Nasdaq Stock Exchange said it had fired an employee for inappropriate social media posts related to Kirk's death, which violated its anti-violence policy.
The Secret Service also reported on Facebook that it had suspended an agent after he expressed a negative opinion about Kirk.
The agency says it will not tolerate behavior violating our code of conduct.
Can a private company have its own rules instead of adhering to so-called freedom of speech?
And United Airlines told Columbia Broadcasting System News that it has disciplined several employees who made public comments about Kirk, citing its zero-tolerance policy for politically motivated violence. Transport Minister Sean Duffy praised the airline's decision.
Delta and American Airlines have implemented similar actions with their employees.
Let's invite Columbia Broadcasting System News Money Watch reporter Megan Charula to explain more.
Thank you for joining us to talk about all of this.
When many companies make these decisions, what does that reveal about the political consequences in the professional sphere when people make such statements?
Companies quickly fired or disciplined employees who spoke out on this sensitive issue.
And this reminds us that political speech is not protected, and that in the United States, most employees are employed at will.
This means either the employee or employer can end the contract at any time for any reason. So this implies that employees need to act very carefully to protect their jobs if they don't want to face the consequences that many workers in various industries have faced in recent days.
Megan, is there a sense that companies might be more sensitive in today's climate? And also, what consequences might businesses face if an employee is in such a position saying such things? Human resources experts say that companies want to remain.
They are apolitical these days. This means they don't want to be seen as supporting one side in politically charged issues.
And this extends to their employees. We've even seen some well-known figures get fired. Even unknown employees can be linked to the company and associated with it through their LinkedIn profiles. This can harm the business's reputation. And if the company is perceived as being associated with a certain political party, its opponents may boycott it or decide not to use its services.
So are there real consequences for companies that decide to take sides in such an issue? Yes, absolutely.
Words have consequences.
That is, let's say United Airlines is competing with Delta Airlines, and it becomes known that United pilots are celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. What do you think will happen? Half the country won't want to fly with them, and where will they go? To K. Delta, which means huge losses and possibly even bankruptcy for United. That's why large companies, when hiring employees, sign a contract with them stating that any action by the employee that could negatively affect the company's operations, work, or image can be grounds for dismissal.
So can companies? I have to ask if it's legal. Can they fire employees based on comments and these controversial issues?
I suppose if they're at-will employees, it all falls under that category. You just did my job for me.
So yes, if we're talking about private companies and you're an at-will employee, that's exactly what it means.
Namely, that the employer can fire you at their discretion. However, there are certain protections. For example, we say that even though we have at-will employment, you can't fire people based on their membership in a protected category, for instance. But generally, if a private employer finds something they don't like about a private employee, then yes, this can continue with some caveats again.
Yes, I think there has been a lot of debate about the First Amendment, about freedom of speech.
But when it comes to working in a company, it's a different situation.
So we've established that private companies not only have a different right, but in some sense are also obligated to make sure their employees don't do anything that would interfere with the company's work. Many people, myself included. Many, including myself, were alarmed by United States Attorney General Pam Bondi's statement about prosecuting hate speech. Well, I mean, hate speech is what the left used to do, and it's what we hated.
Attorney General Pam Bondi faced criticism after she stated on a podcast that hate speech could be prosecuted by law. Today on X, Kagiri clarified by saying that hate speech crosses the line into threats. Violence is a crime. How do you tell hate speech from free speech in this context? All right, if we go back to what we were just talking about, namely private employers, and then return to what Pam Bondi is saying.
Because she is a member of the government, so...
A major fork in the road when it comes to the First Amendment is the idea that the First Amendment protects us from censorship by the government.
So, can a private employer say, I don't like what you said, we're going to fire you? Generally speaking, yes. Can the government do that?
Then we have other questions. Can the government prosecute you for the content of your speech?
This is what the First Amendment protects.
Now, as for what exactly is protected, well, not all speech, but hate speech is a protected category.
And you have a lot of information from judges, a lot of opinions where they talk about it. It can be nasty, it can be disgusting, but that's exactly why we protect it. We're not worried about protecting pleasant speech.
Again, as they say to Voltaire, I do not agree with a single word you say, but I am ready to die for your right to express your opinion. Of course, that's not Voltaire, and it's not an exact translation, but essentially it's correct.
Now, what she says in her comment is that she kind of translates this into the category of perhaps a real threat.
A real threat or incitement where violence can happen immediately is different, and that type of speech can be punished.
Hate speech generally is not punished. Incitement and true threats are categories that are so-called prescribed, where punishment can result from the content of your speech.
That is, as long as you are not calling for violence or threatening harm.
Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, Stephen Miller, promised to use law enforcement against Americans who
Mocked Kirk's death, calling it domestic terrorism. We
will not live in fear, but you will live in exile, because the power of law enforcement under President Trump will be used to find you. We will use it to take your money, take your power, and if you broke the law, take your freedom.
Consequences have begun. Defense Minister Pithexeth suspended an Army colonel over a post. He criticized Kirk after his death and said that the Pentagon, quote, is very closely monitoring reactions that celebrate or mock Kirk's death, adding that they, quote, will respond immediately.
Leftist television isn't showing the situation accurately, but that's typical for leftists, right? All United States Army officers sign a commitment not to participate in any political battles or discussions, and they are not allowed to publicly take the side of any political party. Because our Army is required to remain neutral, not just the entire Army, but every single member of it. An officer who has expressed, well, his position, his oath, means he did not keep it and must be dismissed.
Second, according to
The State Department's second-ranking official vowed to punish foreigners who mocked the murder, calling them unwelcome guests in our country.
And here's the manipulation. If you came as a guest, student, tourist, or businessman to our country, and you, let's say, glorify terrorism, murder, or political persecution, we don't want to see you on our land. Get out.
Subtitles. Washington Post columnist Carnadia said she was fired for posts about Charlie Kirk, gun violence, and race. Across the country, it is reported that many professionals, from government employees to teachers and college professors, have lost their jobs for comments critical of Kirk.
As a new battle for freedom unfolds in a tense political climate,
of speech. What's remarkable is that the outcry they're silencing us didn't start when half the country was imprisoned and, so to speak, forcibly silenced. We were fired, denied university entry, and persecuted. If a baker refused to write "Hooray for same-sex marriage" on his cake, he would be taken to court. Or even if you simply said on YouTube that marriage is between a man and a woman, they would start punishing you, kicking you out, banning you, just like they said. If you posted on Facebook or Google that there are differences between men and women, they would block you for a week, a month, or even shut you down completely. Back then, silencing people was considered normal, but suddenly the editors started to care. And it was the same people who demanded to shut down my channel, Subtitles, and many others, just because I simply supported Trump.
Subtitles by Dima Torzak.
To understand Americans' freedom of speech rights and limits, we look to Will Krill. He is legal director of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, a legal and advocacy firm defending free speech.
Jamil Bai, an opinion columnist at the New York Times, whose latest article examines this very issue.
Gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining us. I want to start off by saying that obviously there is no justification for violence, let alone killing another person. But we need to take a deeper look at this issue of freedom of speech. So I want to start by asking both of you how you see the very polarized reaction to the murder of Charlie Kirk. The fact that we have two very different reactions here. Will, first to
you, thank you very much for having me. It seems inevitable. You could see this coming from a mile away. Every time we go through some kind of cultural or national tragedy when someone is killed, whether it's George Floyd, Barbara Bush, Queen Elizabeth, when we lose a public figure, there are people who say, well, I'm glad they're gone. And then the outrage cycle begins. People get fired, suspended, investigated, and dismissed. My organization is currently receiving help requests nationwide and tracking all firings and suspensions. We have a lot of work. It's regrettable, sad, and deeply depressing.
Time. What about
you? I agree that you can see things like this coming from a mile away. I'll say that part of me wonders, what do people expect in a free society? Right, there's nothing. Of course, it's impolite to speak ill of the dead, but we live in a country where people are used to expressing their opinions on all issues and problems and about people.
And that should be natural.
When a public figure, especially a controversial one, dies, people will have different reactions, and some of them will be very negative toward the figure himself. It seems to me that this is simply part of what it means to live in a free
society. PBS is so funny. So it's a hotbed of rotten, vile leftism. We also pay from our taxes, so to speak. We pay for their work. First of all, now they're being shut down by weak Trump, or rather, he's saying exist however you want. We're not going to give you any more money. So, first of all, he says, this very person who talks there, not about the joy of death or justifying murder, but about someone not loving the one who was killed. Well, he says you were already a dog and died like a dog. If you are a professor at a university, then the university can strip you of your right to teach if it decides that you have violated your obligation to remain neutral. And maybe they can even fire you so you don't damage their reputation or tarnish their name. If you are a television host, then your bosses might decide that you are making their programs look bad to viewers and fire you. But then why did neither of them ever say anything when they were oppressed for all 4 years? Us, when we were being pushed out of social networks, television, radio, universities, schools, and everything else, even back then, you could be expelled from sports just for what you said. Only women should participate in women's sports. That's not a call for violence, right? I don't think so. It's not about inciting the crowd to start a riot or stirring up passions. This is an opinion. We were thrown out, and they on PBS and all sorts of others stayed silent because when we were thrown out, PBS didn't
care. After Charlie Kirk's death, social media was filled with opinions from both sides.
Some lost jobs due to their posts.
The anger reached the Buffalo Grove School Board meeting last night, where some parents are demanding that a teacher be fired for her social media comments comparing Charlie Kirk's followers to uniformed men at rallies in the 1930s.
I'm not a Nazi. I'm a Republican, not a Nazi. Charlie Kirk wasn't a Nazi, was he?
But the parents don't want a teacher who actually called the parents of her students fascists. They don't want her to keep teaching their children. Interestingly, there's a European political commentator now, originally from Russia, Konstantin Kisin. His parents moved when he was a child. He talks about freedom of speech and political interference in our lives. Listen, it's interesting.
He said, this is an absolutely crazy position for me as someone who came from a society where there was no freedom of speech. And when I came here, my parents actually sacrificed their savings to bring me here. You know, they didn't move. They sent me to a boarding school here with the only money they had. The reason they did this was so that I could live in a free society and think that it happened. And now this fundamental principle of this country has become a marginal issue that apparently, at best, is considered right-wing. It's striking.
It's striking. Constantine is amazed that now the right to vote is a demand of the right wing, he says, and not a common basic doctrine that actually united the Western
civilization. Okay. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the debate on hate speech. Should freedom of speech be restricted? Let's begin, Den. I want to start with you.
You've been labeled both a free speech killer and a travel enthusiast.
And I think we need a more accurate, or at least a more correct understanding.
What's your stance on free speech?
What happened in your personal life that led you to these conclusions and motivated you to do the work you do?
Now, Thank you very much. That's a wonderful title. I really appreciate it. I don't know if I deserve it. My goal is not to oppose freedom of speech and restricting speech in any way. Actually, I'm fighting for responsibility to the extent that responsibility means it will limit certain actions, including speech acts, then I can impose certain restrictions. But my main task is really to ensure that all participants on the internet are held accountable. Responsible, just as we teach our children to be responsible, as the main ethical and philosophical foundation on which our society is built. That's all I want. And what I really, again, if that sometimes puts me against freedom of speech, and sometimes, to your great surprise, it doesn't, well, I can live with that. And I'm pretty sure it's necessary. Clearly, Ivan will make it clear where we may or may not disagree. But please remember, I'm not against speech, and I'm certainly not against freedom of speech, but I am for
responsibility, a role I find completely unclear. You can say whatever you want, but you'll have to answer for it. So go ahead and talk, but then you'll be held accountable for it. What does that mean? In my opinion, that's punishment. In my opinion, that's censorship. In my opinion, that's
persecution. That strong freedom of speech is strong enough to extend even to ideas that others consider
hateful. From my point of view, that's absolutely right. If you start thinking that this was hate speech, then someone will definitely say that it offends them. And that's why it should be banned, right? And then you start banning it. Stalin believed that any negative statement about him personally should be prosecuted. Under Hitler, it was forbidden to demand equal rights for Jews. Any ruler wants to stop any dissent and negativity towards themselves.
That's why I definitely share Dan's goals. I just strongly disagree that censorship is not an effective or appropriate means to promote these
goals. Here is the opposite point of view, namely that censorship leads to oppression. Always. I won't get into theory anymore. Let's get back to our business. Several right-wing commentators have already warned that our response to the left's oppression cannot be our oppression of the left. To punish for a crime, yes, the law was broken, and that's necessary. If the law was broken, society needs to understand that the law is not something you can twist however you want. You want that the law must be obeyed. They should know that if you don't like the law, yes, so to speak, obey it, but also call for it to be changed. Start persuading your congressmen and senators to change this law. Start a movement, like Charlie Kirk, to make a difference. But to stoop to the level of the leftist rotten swamp creatures and block information flows that are unfavorable to them, yes, that's anti-American activity. From my point of view, this should be subject to prosecution, and we shouldn't silence people with different opinions, because then we'll turn into them, into dictators, into tyrants, into... I don't even know how to say it. Maybe into madmen? Yeah, no one will tell me that I'm a tyrant or a madman just because I like a good sandwich with my tea. That was read by Yursky. I just can't remember who it was right now. Maybe Burns or maybe... No. Once Julius Caesar was killed because they feared he was planning to become emperor and the Roman Republic would disappear. The consequence of the shock from his assassination was the transformation of the Republic into an empire. Under no circumstances should we end up in Tojikapkan. We must ensure that any speech, even the kind we really don't want people to hear, cannot be stopped by force. Unless it's an incitement to violence, again, or a glorification of some specific act of violence, which is basically the same as incitement to violence, right? Why do we need freedom? Why do we need freedom at all, and freedom of speech in particular? First, it's the only moral way to coexist. I'll explain now. Leave your neighbor alone, Lucifer. Leave them alone. Don't touch or stop them. Don't force them. You don't bother him. He doesn't bother you. It's not the majority stopping or forcing the minority. Well, let's call that democracy, right? But if it's the other way around, if the minority demands and stops the majority, that's autocracy. No, even if 99% wants and forces that 1%, absolutely not. No way. Because if the rights of one person are taken away, even for the benefit of 99.9%, it will inevitably lead to what will happen next. 98. Violate the rights of 2, and then 51 violate the rights of 49. And then it rolls on like gravity. You know, an apple should always fall down to the ground, not up, not to the side, unless you throw it. Yeah, just let it go. And it shouldn't fall to the side or up, it should fall down. Because if just once it happens differently, it will fly to the side in a zigzag. Yeah. That means gravity is a deception, so it's gravity. Does not exist. It's the same, gentlemen, with freedom of speech. If there's no freedom of speech, once it won't fall down, but sideways or up, and there's no freedom of speech. 100%. Not 99, 3478, 23 or 24%. There are keys. Calling for violence isn't free speech. This is inciting someone to be forced to do something they don't want to do, even up to taking their life. So this is interference in someone else's life. This is not freedom, neither of speech nor any other kind of freedom, if there is no mental freedom. Always, once again, 1,000 people want to do something, and it is done by taking something away from one person. This is not freedom. This is not freedom. This is violence, which then leads to democracy and then leads to gulags. Always, without exception, if there is no freedom, always for everyone, it will inevitably and unavoidably lead to violence, oppression, and what we call tyranny. Continuation. The first indicator of moving toward lawlessness, gulags, interrogations in dungeons, torture, confiscation of property, deprivation of all freedoms. The very, very, very first sign is the gradual deprivation of our freedom. And this was done by the left. This is something we did not do and will not do. And those who are being fired from their jobs, well, I don't know. From schools, from the army, from universities, from the media. For lying, for inciting hatred, for justifying terrorism, for justifying murder. Well, should we feel sorry? No, not at all. This has nothing to do with freedom of speech. He was fired by a private company because they didn't want their image to be associated with this person. This has nothing to do with freedom of speech, freedom of religion, assembly, association, freedom of movement, or freedom of expression. 0, unless it restricts another person's freedom or serves as a call to restrict freedom of others. What the government can do, well, let's say like under Obama, Biden, like our paramilitary, all sorts of security agencies did. A person owns his life, his thoughts, his plans, what he has come up with, and the property that he has, let's say, acquired legally using his mind and his hands. You don't have the right to control even 1% of his possessions, and you should have the right to control your life, your thoughts, your ideas, and your property, not by 99, but by 100%. Then and only then we, as people, will be able to live in harmony with ourselves and the world, become free and become a happy society. But if not, if even by 1% it's not, then, ladies and gentlemen, this is the road to hell, which is commonly known as socialism.